You're sitting in a dimly lit concert hall, waiting for the performance to begin. The murmur of the audience settles into expectant silence. The stage lights come up, and a small child walks out, so small their feet barely reach the piano pedals. They sit, adjust the bench, and then their fingers begin to dance across the keys with a precision and emotional depth that shouldn't be possible. You feel tears forming without quite understanding why. Welcome back to Midnight Deep Dive. If you're new here, welcome to our cozy corner of the internet where we explore fascinating stories designed to ease you gently into sleep. Wherever you are right now, I'm so glad you've decided to join me for tonight's adventure. Tonight, we're exploring one of humanity's most beautiful and sometimes heartbreaking mysteries, the child prodigy. These are children who can do things that most adults will never accomplish. Composing symphonies at 5, solving university-level mathematics at 7, playing chess at grandmaster level before they're old enough to drive. How is this possible? What happens in their minds that's different from the rest of us? And perhaps most importantly, what does it feel like to be that child? So settle in, find that comfortable spot, and let's journey together through the extraordinary world of children who see the world differently than the rest of us. Our story begins with a question that has fascinated humanity for centuries. Are prodigies born or are they made? There's something both magical and unsettling about watching a 4-year-old do something that most adults will never accomplish. The child doesn't seem to understand that what they're doing is extraordinary. To them, it's simply natural, as easy as breathing. They look at complex mathematical equations or piano scores or chess positions the way other children look at picture books, with complete comprehension and genuine delight. The term child prodigy gets thrown around fairly casually these days. Every parent thinks their child is special, gifted, ahead of the curve. And in truth, many children do show early aptitude in various areas. But a genuine prodigy represents something far rarer and more profound than a child who reads early or shows artistic talent. A true prodigy performs at adult professional levels in highly demanding fields while still in childhood, demonstrating abilities that seem to defy developmental timelines. Psychologists generally define a child prodigy as someone under age 10 who demonstrates adult-level expertise in a domain that requires extensive training and skill. This definition immediately excludes many areas where children naturally excel. A child who's physically coordinated or socially adept isn't necessarily a prodigy. Those abilities often develop naturally. But a 6-year-old performing violin concertos that professional musicians spend decades mastering. A 7-year-old solving mathematical problems that stump university professors. An 8-year-old playing chess at grandmaster level. These represent something genuinely exceptional. What's crucial to understand is that prodigious ability differs fundamentally from general giftedness or high intelligence. Plenty of children have IQs in the gifted range, scores above 130 or 140, and develop normally, perhaps achieving well in school and going on to successful careers. But prodigies display almost unnatural facility in specific domains, often combined with intense, seemingly obsessive focus that drives them toward excellence in their particular field. Historical fascination with child prodigies stretches back millennia. Ancient cultures told stories of children with divine gifts, young oracles who spoke prophecies, and child scholars who surpassed their teachers. These stories often blended reality with mythology, but they reflected genuine encounters with exceptionally capable young people. In a world without widespread education or formal testing, a child who displayed remarkable abilities would have seemed almost supernatural. The Renaissance and Enlightenment periods brought increased documentation of child prodigies, as literacy spread and more people could record their observations. Court musicians, noble children educated by renowned tutors, and young mathematicians began appearing in historical records with their achievements documented. These weren't myths or legends. They were real children whose abilities could be verified by multiple witnesses. Yet there was often something melancholy in these accounts. Even in historical records, you can sense the weight these children carried. They were exhibited, displayed, brought before royalty and scholars to demonstrate their gifts. They received praise and attention, certainly, but they also faced enormous pressure and expectations. Many historical child prodigies disappeared from record after their youth, their adult lives seemingly less remarkable than their childhoods, raising questions that echo through every discussion of prodigious talent. Modern understanding of child prodigies began developing in the late 19th and early 20th centuries as psychology emerged as a scientific discipline. Researchers began studying exceptional children systematically, trying to understand what made them different. Lewis Terman's longitudinal study of gifted children, which began in 1921 and followed subjects throughout their lives, provided crucial insights into how high intelligence and early ability affect life trajectories. What Terman discovered was both encouraging and sobering. Many of his termites, as the study subjects came to be called, led successful, fulfilling lives. They became professors, scientists, authors, and professionals, but they didn't necessarily become the revolutionary geniuses everyone expected. Very few became household names. Some struggled with the pressure of expectations. Others simply led normal, happy lives that happened to involve above-average, but not exceptional achievement. This finding highlighted something important. Prodigious ability in childhood doesn't guarantee revolutionary achievement in adulthood. The relationship between early talent and lifetime accomplishment is complex, influenced by personality, opportunity, mental health, support systems, and countless other factors. A child who plays piano beautifully at age 6 might become a concert pianist, or might become a perfectly happy accountant who plays for personal enjoyment. Neither outcome makes them a failure. The emotional weight of being a prodigy is something that often gets overlooked in our fascination with their abilities. Imagine being 8 years old and constantly told you're special, extraordinary, gifted beyond measure. You're performing for adults, receiving praise that feels both wonderful and heavy. You know you're different from other children, but you don't necessarily know why or what it means. Your entire identity becomes wrapped up in this one ability, this thing you do that makes adults react with awe. Now imagine the pressure. Every performance, every competition, every test becomes weighted with expectation. You're not just playing piano or solving math problems. You're validating your special status, proving you're worth the investment of time and resources, living up to everyone's image of you as exceptional. The fear of failure becomes enormous, because failure means disappointing everyone and potentially losing your identity as a prodigy. Many former child prodigies describe their childhoods with mixed feelings. The ability itself often brought genuine joy. The pure pleasure of doing something you're naturally good at, the satisfaction of mastery, the beauty of excellence. But the context surrounding that ability, the pressure, the performances, the loss of normal childhood experiences, created stress and anxiety that sometimes overshadowed the joy. There's also the profound loneliness that many prodigies experience. When you're intellectually or creatively operating at adult levels while still being a child emotionally and socially, you exist in a strange liminal space. You're too advanced to fully connect with other children who can't relate to your interests or abilities. But you're too young to truly connect with the adults in your field who may respect your abilities, but can't engage with you as an equal because you're still a child in most respects. This isolation can be particularly acute for prodigies in fields like mathematics or chess, where the subject matter itself is fairly abstract and difficult to share casually. A young musical prodigy at least produces something that others can appreciate and enjoy. A math prodigy's work, no matter how brilliant, remains largely inaccessible to anyone without significant mathematical training. They might solve beautiful, elegant problems that bring them deep satisfaction, but they can't share that beauty with their family or age peers in any meaningful way. The question of whether prodigious ability is a gift or a burden doesn't have a simple answer. For some prodigies, their exceptional ability becomes the foundation for deeply fulfilling lives and careers. They grow into their talent, find communities of peers, and use their abilities to contribute something meaningful to their fields and to the world. Their early development gave them a head start that they parlayed into genuine excellence and satisfaction. For others, prodigious ability becomes a weight that's difficult to carry into adulthood. The pressure, the expectations, the loss of normal developmental experiences, the difficulty forming relationships, these challenges can outweigh the benefits of the ability itself. Some former prodigies describe feeling relief when they chose to step away from their area of prodigy-level performance, finally able to live more normally, even if less exceptionally. Picture a candlelit room in 18th century Salzburg, where a small boy sits at a harpsichord, his feet barely reaching the floor. His tiny fingers move across the keys with supernatural grace, producing music so sophisticated that the adults watching feel tears in their eyes. Leopold Mozart watches his son Wolfgang with a mixture of pride, wonder, and calculation. This child could change everything for their family. This child could change music itself. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart remains history's most famous musical prodigy, and for good reason. By age 5, he was composing minuets that still charm listeners today. By 6, he was performing before European royalty. By his teenage years, he had composed symphonies, concertos, and operas that remain staples of the classical repertoire. His musical facility seemed almost inhuman. He could hear a piece once and play it back perfectly, compose complete works in his head before writing them down, and produce music with a maturity and emotional depth that belied his youth. But Mozart's story also reveals the complex dynamics surrounding child prodigies. His father Leopold was a capable musician and a relentless promoter who recognized Wolfgang's abilities early and structured the child's entire life around developing and displaying that talent. Wolfgang and his sister Nannerl, who was also musically gifted, spent their childhoods touring Europe, performing in courts and salons, essentially working as professional musicians before they were 10 years old. The tour were grueling. Long journeys by carriage, performances in different cities every few weeks, constant pressure to impress aristocratic audiences who could provide patronage or commissions. Wolfgang fell ill several times during these tours, sometimes seriously. He had little formal education outside of music. His childhood was consumed by his prodigious ability and his father's ambition to capitalize on it. Yet Mozart himself seemed to genuinely love music. His letters reveal someone who found deep joy in composition and performance, who thought in musical terms, who couldn't imagine life without music. The question becomes, was Mozart's love of music natural to him? Or was it the inevitable result of having his entire identity shaped around musical performance from his earliest years? Would he have chosen music if given a genuine choice? Or was he simply making the best of the life path chosen for him? Ludwig van Beethoven presents another fascinating case of musical prodigy, though his story differs significantly from Mozart's. Beethoven's father, recognizing his son's musical talent, attempted to promote him as a prodigy in the Mozart mold. The father was abusive, forcing young Ludwig to practice for hours, sometimes waking him in the middle of the night to play for his drunk friends. Beethoven's early musical development was accompanied by trauma that would affect him throughout his life. Despite this difficult beginning, or perhaps partly because of it, Beethoven developed into one of history's most revolutionary composers. His early mastery of classical forms allowed him to later break and reform those structures, creating music that expanded what was possible in the medium. The prodigy became the innovator, using his early developed technical mastery as a foundation for creative revolution. Modern musical prodigies continue to capture public imagination. Alma Deutscher, who began composing at age 4 and had composed a full opera by age 10, has been called the new Mozart. Her music displays sophisticated understanding of classical forms combined with genuine melodic gift. Jay Greenberg, who composed symphonies in his early childhood and was featured in a 60-minute special titled The Music Wunderkind, could hear multiple symphonies simultaneously in his head, transcribing them as quickly as he could write. What makes musical prodigies particularly fascinating is that music combines multiple cognitive abilities: auditory processing, pattern recognition, motor control, emotional expression, and mathematical structure. A musical prodigy isn't just good at one thing. They're demonstrating exceptional ability across multiple domains simultaneously. Neuroscience research has revealed some of what happens in the brains of musical prodigies. Brain imaging studies show that musicians who begin training early develop stronger connections between motor areas and auditory areas, essentially creating superhighways for translating what they hear into what they play. The earlier the training begins, the more dramatic these structural changes can be. The role of myelin, the insulation around nerve fibers that makes neural transmission faster and more efficient, appears crucial. Intensive practice during childhood, when the brain is highly plastic, leads to increased myelination in pathways related to musical performance. This physical change in brain structure helps explain why early training produces such dramatic results. The brain is literally rewiring itself to become a more efficient music processing machine. Perfect pitch or absolute pitch, the ability to identify or produce musical notes without a reference tone, appears almost exclusively in musicians who began training before age 6. This suggests a critical period in auditory development where the brain can learn to categorize pitches absolutely rather than relatively. Children who begin music training after this window typically develop relative pitch, which is useful but not the same phenomenon. Musical prodigies often describe experiencing music differently than other people. They hear music as shapes, colors, or spatial structures. They can visualize how pieces fit together, see the architecture of symphonies, or experience synesthesia, where sounds automatically trigger visual or other sensory experiences. This different mode of perception helps explain both their facility with music and their, sometimes, difficulty relating to people who don't experience the world in these ways. The relationship between music and emotion in prodigies is particularly interesting. Very young children typically can't express emotional depth in their playing. They can play the notes accurately, but the interpretation remains somewhat mechanical. Yet musical prodigies often demonstrate surprising emotional maturity in their performances, seeming to understand and convey feelings that they shouldn't have experienced yet. This raises questions about whether musical prodigies are actually experiencing emotions differently or simply have exceptional ability to mimic emotional expression they've heard from adult musicians. Some researchers suggest that prodigies might have heightened emotional sensitivity generally, allowing them to access and express complex feelings earlier than typical children. Others argue that their technical mastery allows them to reproduce emotional qualities they recognize in music, without necessarily understanding those emotions the same way adults do. The pressure on young musical prodigies can be intense. Concert tour, competitions, recordings, media appearances, all before adolescence. There's enormous financial investment from families, expectations from teachers and mentors, and the weight of being constantly compared to historical prodigies like Mozart. Every performance becomes an opportunity to prove themselves or to fail publicly. Many musical prodigies describe feeling more comfortable with music than with people. Music follows predictable rules and patterns. It makes sense in ways human relationships sometimes don't. The piano doesn't judge you for being different or strange. The violin doesn't care if you don't understand social cues. For children who struggle with the social complexity of childhood, music can become a refuge, a place where they can excel and find acceptance. But this refuge can also become a trap. When music is your escape, your identity, your source of praise and validation, stepping away from it becomes nearly impossible. Even when practice feels like drudgery, when performance creates anxiety, when you wonder what else life might hold. The pull of music remains strong because without it, who are you? The transition from child prodigy to adult musician is particularly challenging. As a child, you're remarkable simply for being able to perform at high levels at a young age. As an adult, you're competing with everyone else at those same high levels, and your youth no longer makes you special. Many prodigies struggle with this transition, finding that being very good isn't enough when you've been raised believing you're exceptional. Yet when musical prodigies successfully navigate childhood and adolescence, when they find joy in music beyond the performance of being a prodigy, they can develop into artists who bring genuine beauty into the world. The early training gives them technical mastery that frees them to focus on interpretation and expression. Their years of deep engagement with music provide them with understanding that allows meaningful artistic contribution. There's something particularly abstract and mysterious about mathematical genius in children. When a 3-year-old plays piano beautifully, we can hear and appreciate their ability directly. But when a 6-year-old solves differential equations or proves theorems, most of us can only take experts' word for it that what the child is doing is extraordinary. Mathematics operates in a realm that remains largely invisible and incomprehensible to people without significant mathematical training. Carl Friedrich Gauss, born in 1777 in Germany, became one of history's most famous mathematical prodigies. The story, possibly embellished but telling nonetheless, describes young Gauss in elementary school being given a busy work task by his teacher. Add all the numbers from 1 to 100. While his classmates laboriously added numbers one by one, Gauss immediately saw the pattern. He paired the numbers, 1 with 100, 2 with 99, 3 with 98, and so on. Each pair summed to 101, and there were 50 pairs, so the answer was 50-50. He wrote the answer on his slate within seconds and spent the rest of the period sitting quietly while his classmates worked. This anecdote reveals something essential about mathematical prodigies. They often don't solve problems the way they're taught. They see patterns, structures, and relationships that allow them to leap to solutions through insight rather than calculation. For Gauss, the problem wasn't about addition. It was about recognizing structure. This type of pattern recognition and structural understanding characterizes mathematical genius. Terence Tao represents one of the most remarkable mathematical minds of our era. Born in Adelaide, Australia, in 1975, Tao showed extraordinary mathematical ability from age 2. By age 9, he was taking university-level mathematics courses. By 13, he was the youngest person ever to win a gold medal at the International Mathematical Olympiad. He earned his PhD from Princeton at age 20 and became a full professor at UCLA at 24. The youngest person in that institution's history to achieve that rank. What makes Tao's story particularly interesting is that his parents deliberately tried to provide him with as normal a childhood as possible, despite his extraordinary abilities. They resisted pressure to accelerate his education too rapidly, ensured he had time for play and socializing, and focused on his overall development rather than just his mathematical talent. This approach seems to have contributed to Tao becoming not just a brilliant mathematician, but a well-adjusted adult who collaborates effectively with others and contributes broadly to his field. Mathematical prodigies often describe experiencing mathematics visually or spatially. They don't just see numbers and equations. They see landscapes, structures, shapes that move and transform. For them, mathematics has a kind of beauty that's difficult to communicate to non-mathematicians. An elegant proof isn't just logically correct. It's beautiful in the same way a sunset or a musical composition can be beautiful. This visual spatial aspect of mathematical thinking helps explain why some people can perform complex calculations or understand advanced concepts while still being children in other respects. The mathematics isn't abstract to them. It's concrete, visual, almost physical. Numbers and equations have properties they can see and manipulate mentally, the way other people might visualize moving furniture around a room. The relationship between mathematical ability and other forms of intelligence is complex. Mathematical prodigies often have high IQs, but there are exceptions. Some children with only average general intelligence display exceptional mathematical ability. And conversely, some children with very high IQs don't show particular mathematical aptitude. This suggests that mathematical talent represents a specific type of cognitive processing, rather than simply general intelligence applied to mathematics. One of the most fascinating aspects of mathematical prodigies is their ability to discover mathematical truths independently. A child who learns to play piano is reproducing music that already exists. A child who learns to solve mathematics problems might be reproducing known solutions. But mathematical prodigies often independently derive formulas, discover patterns, or prove theorems that they've never been taught. They're not just learning mathematics, they're discovering it for themselves. This independent discovery reveals that mathematics exists in some sense independently of human knowledge. The relationships between numbers, the properties of geometric shapes, the patterns in sequences, these things are true regardless of whether anyone knows about them. Mathematical prodigies seem to have an unusual ability to perceive these truths directly, to see what must be true based on fundamental principles. Srinivasa Ramanujan represents perhaps the most mysterious case of mathematical genius. Born in India in 1887 with limited access to formal mathematical education, Ramanujan independently discovered thousands of mathematical formulas, many of which were unknown to professional mathematicians. His work included results so advanced that even experts struggled to understand how he arrived at them. Ramanujan claimed that his discoveries came to him in dreams, given by the goddess Namagiri. Whether or not divine inspiration was involved, Ramanujan's case demonstrates that mathematical insight can emerge without extensive formal training. He saw mathematical truths that eluded people who had studied mathematics for decades. When British mathematician G.H. Hardy brought Ramanujan to Cambridge, Hardy described working with Ramanujan as one of the most remarkable experiences of his life, a glimpse into a mind that operated completely differently from his own. The social challenges facing mathematical prodigies can be particularly acute. Mathematics is largely a solitary pursuit at advanced levels. You can't really share your work casually with people who don't have the background to understand it. For a child who's already socially isolated by being different from peers, the abstract nature of their gift creates additional barriers to connection. Many young mathematical prodigies find community online or at specialized programs for gifted students. Mathematical Olympiad competitions, summer programs at universities, and online forums allow them to connect with intellectual peers, even if those peers are geographically distant or much older. These connections can be crucial for maintaining enthusiasm and preventing the isolation that might otherwise accompany mathematical talent. The question of what happens to mathematical prodigies as they grow up has been extensively studied. Some become professional mathematicians, contributing to their fields in meaningful ways. Others shift to related areas like physics, computer science, or engineering. And some leave mathematics entirely, finding that their childhood passion didn't translate into adult career satisfaction. One interesting finding is that early mathematical ability doesn't necessarily predict revolutionary mathematical achievement in adulthood. Being able to solve difficult problems quickly as a child demonstrates certain cognitive abilities, but producing truly original mathematical research requires additional qualities: creativity, persistence, the ability to work on problems for years without solution, and often collaborative skills that many prodigies struggle with. The role of obsessive focus in mathematical prodigies is worth noting. Many display what appears to be almost pathological interest in numbers and patterns from very early ages. They think about mathematics constantly, see mathematical patterns everywhere, and prefer mathematical puzzles to other activities. This intense focus drives their rapid development, but can also create imbalance if not carefully managed. Parents and educators of mathematical prodigies face difficult decisions about acceleration and enrichment. Should a 6-year-old working at university level be placed in university mathematics courses? This provides appropriate intellectual challenge, but creates social awkwardness and potential gaps in developmental experience. Should they remain with age peers for social development while receiving separate mathematical education? This prevents some social isolation, but can make the child feel even more different from their classmates. There's also the question of breadth versus depth. Mathematical prodigies can easily spend all their time on mathematics at the expense of developing other skills and interests. But mathematics at the highest levels requires broad knowledge: physics, computer science, sometimes biology or economics. And life requires skills beyond mathematics. Ensuring that mathematical prodigies develop as whole people rather than just as mathematical savants requires conscious effort and often resistance from the children themselves who just want to do mathematics. The beautiful thing about mathematical prodigies, despite all the challenges, is their genuine love of mathematics. Most describe experiencing joy when working on mathematical problems, a sense of peace and rightness when immersed in mathematical thinking. For them, mathematics isn't work or a path to achievement. It's genuinely fascinating, endlessly interesting, deeply satisfying. That pure intellectual joy, the love of mathematics for its own sake, represents something valuable that can sustain them through the challenges that come with being different. Imagine a kindergartner sitting across a chessboard from an adult who's played the game for decades. The child's legs swing freely, not quite reaching the floor. Maybe they're holding a stuffed animal in one hand while moving pieces with the other. And then, systematically and brilliantly, they dismantle their opponent's position, seeing combinations and consequences that the adult completely missed. This scene plays out regularly in the world of chess prodigies, where some of the game's brightest minds inhabit bodies that still need car seats. Bobby Fischer remains one of history's most famous chess prodigies, achieving grandmaster status at age 15, the youngest in history at that time. Fischer learned chess at 6 and was playing in tournaments by 7. His understanding of the game deepened rapidly, and by his teenage years, he was already competing with the world's best players. Fischer's story demonstrates both the heights that chess prodigies can reach and the psychological challenges that often accompany exceptional ability. Fischer was famously difficult, paranoid, and obsessive. Whether these traits caused his chess genius or resulted from it remains debated, but his life illustrates how the intense focus required for chess mastery can create imbalance in other areas. Fischer eventually became increasingly isolated, made controversial statements, and lived his later years in relative obscurity and exile. His chess brilliance came with personal costs that make his story both inspiring and cautionary. The record for youngest chess grandmaster has fallen repeatedly over the past few decades as training methods improve and young players get earlier access to high-level competition. Sergei Karjakin achieved grandmaster at 12 years and 7 months in 2002. That record stood until Abhimanyu Misra broke it in 2021 at 12 years and 4 months. These achievements require not just talent, but thousands of hours of study, practice, and competition during childhood. What makes chess particularly interesting as a domain for child prodigies is that it's a closed system with clear rules and measurable skill levels. In music or mathematics, evaluating a prodigy's ability requires expert judgment. But in chess, skill can be measured precisely through ratings and competitive results. A child playing at grandmaster level is objectively performing at a level that only a tiny fraction of adult players ever achieve. Chess prodigies demonstrate several cognitive abilities simultaneously. They must visualize board positions several moves ahead, recognize patterns from thousands of studied games, evaluate multiple candidate moves quickly, and execute long-term strategic plans while adapting to opponents' responses. This combination of memory, visualization, pattern recognition, and strategic thinking makes chess an excellent window into how exceptional young minds process information. The pattern recognition ability of chess prodigies is particularly remarkable. They can look at a board position for seconds and understand immediately what's happening. Which side has the advantage, what the key weaknesses are, what plans each side should pursue. This isn't calculation, it's recognition. They've seen similar patterns so many times that they immediately understand the position's character the way you might immediately recognize a friend's face. Brain imaging studies of chess players have revealed interesting differences between masters and novices. Expert chess players show increased activation in areas related to pattern recognition and decreased activation in areas related to conscious deliberation. In other words, they're not thinking harder. They're thinking differently, processing chess positions using neural pathways honed through years of practice. The role of memory in chess prodigies is enormous, but often misunderstood. They're not memorizing every possible position. That's impossible given the astronomical number of possible chess positions. Instead, they're recognizing meaningful patterns and chunks of information. A grandmaster might look at a complex position and see not 20 individual pieces, but several meaningful structures. A weak pawn formation here, a typical attacking pattern there, a familiar endgame structure emerging. This chunking of information is similar to how we read words. Fluent readers don't process individual letters. They recognize entire words and even phrases at a glance. Chess masters process chess positions at a similar level of abstraction, seeing meaningful structures rather than individual pieces. This allows them to evaluate positions quickly and to think many moves ahead without becoming overwhelmed by computational complexity. The training regimen of young chess prodigies can be intense. Many spend hours daily studying games, working with coaches, practicing tactics and endgames, and playing in tournaments. This represents a significant investment of childhood time that other children spend playing with friends, exploring different interests, or simply being bored. Parents of chess prodigies often face difficult questions about whether this intensive focus is worth the developmental costs. The social world of young chess prodigies differs from that of prodigies in other domains. Chess clubs and tournaments provide ready-made communities where exceptional young players can meet peers with similar interests. Age matters less in chess than ability. A 10-year-old who plays at expert level can compete meaningfully with adults, something that's harder in most other domains. This can help reduce some of the isolation that prodigies in other areas experience. However, chess culture can also be quite intense and sometimes unhealthy. The emphasis on ratings and rankings creates constant comparison and competition. Every tournament result affects your rating, creating pressure that can feel overwhelming. Some young chess players develop anxiety around competition or become so focused on ratings that they lose sight of the joy that initially drew them to the game. The relationship between chess ability and general intelligence is interesting. Chess prodigies typically have high IQs, but there are exceptions. Some people with extraordinary chess ability show average intelligence in other domains, and some highly intelligent people never develop exceptional chess skill despite effort. This suggests that chess ability represents a specific type of cognitive processing, important for chess, but not necessarily transferable to other areas. One of the most beautiful aspects of chess is that the game rewards both creativity and logic. A chess prodigy must calculate variations accurately. This requires precise logical thinking, but they must also imagine possibilities, create original plans, and sometimes make intuitive sacrifices that can't be fully calculated. The greatest chess players combine technical precision with artistic vision, much like musicians or mathematicians at their best. The question of whether early chess success predicts later achievement is complex. Some child chess prodigies become world champions or leading grandmasters. Others plateau at strong but not world-class levels. Some burn out or lose interest, finding that the intensive study required to maintain top-level play becomes tedious or overwhelming. And some deliberately step back from competitive chess to pursue other interests or to reclaim balance in their lives. Magnus Carlsen, current world champion, represents a successful transition from child prodigy to adult dominance. Carlsen became grandmaster at 13 and was competing at the highest levels as a teenager. He's maintained motivation and continued improving into his 30s, something that requires not just talent but psychological resilience and genuine love of the game. His success demonstrates that it is possible to navigate child prodigy status and emerge as a fulfilled adult who maintains excellence in their domain. The technology revolution has changed chess training dramatically. Young prodigies now have access to databases with millions of games, engines that can analyze positions with superhuman accuracy, and online platforms for playing opponents worldwide at any time. This democratization of training resources means that talented young players can develop rapidly regardless of where they live. The current generation of chess prodigies may be the strongest in history, partly because of these technological advantages. Yet technology also creates challenges. Engine analysis can make studying chess feel more like memorizing computer evaluations than developing human understanding. The temptation to cheat using computer assistance has created scandals in online chess. And the constant availability of online chess can make the game feel more like an addiction than a hobby for some young players. The essential question for chess prodigies, as for all prodigies, is whether their exceptional ability enriches or constrains their lives. Chess can provide profound satisfaction. The beauty of perfect combinations, the satisfaction of outthinking worthy opponents, the camaraderie of the chess community. But when chess becomes an obligation, when the pressure to perform outweighs the joy of play, when the identity of chess prodigy becomes a cage, then the gift becomes a burden that's difficult to carry. If we could shrink down and travel through the brain of a child prodigy, we would discover something remarkable. Their brains aren't just working harder, they're working differently. The neural landscape of an exceptional mind shows patterns that distinguish it from typical brains, differences that begin revealing themselves in early childhood and become more pronounced with intensive practice and development. The story of Einstein's brain has fascinated scientists for decades. After Einstein's death in 1955, pathologist Thomas Harvey removed the brain during autopsy, hoping to discover what made Einstein's mind so exceptional. The brain was preserved, sectioned, and studied extensively. Some findings were intriguing. Einstein's brain showed unusually extensive connections between hemispheres, particularly in areas related to mathematical and spatial reasoning. His inferior parietal lobe was larger than average, possibly contributing to his visualization abilities. But Einstein's brain also reminded scientists of something important. Exceptional ability isn't reducible to simple anatomical differences. Brains are incredibly complex organs, and genius emerges from patterns of organization, connection, and function that are difficult to observe in preserved tissue. Understanding prodigious ability requires studying living brains in action, watching how they process information and develop over time. Modern brain imaging technology has revealed fascinating differences in how prodigies' brains operate. When musical prodigies listen to or play music, their brains show stronger and more extensive activation in auditory and motor areas compared to typically developing children. These differences aren't just about intensity. The patterns of activation are different, suggesting that prodigies process musical information through different neural pathways. The role of white matter, the brain tissue containing myelin-wrapped axons that connect different brain regions, appears crucial for exceptional ability. Studies have found that prodigies often show enhanced white matter development in pathways relevant to their domain of expertise. This enhanced connectivity allows different brain regions to communicate more efficiently, enabling the rapid information processing that characterizes prodigious performance. Myelin deserves special attention in any discussion of prodigious development. Myelin is the fatty insulation that wraps around axons, dramatically increasing the speed and efficiency of neural transmission. The process of myelination continues throughout childhood and adolescence, shaped partly by genes but also significantly by experience. Intensive practice in any domain promotes myelination in neural pathways used for that practice. This is where the 10,000-hour rule, the idea that expert performance requires approximately 10,000 hours of practice, connects to neuroscience. Those thousands of hours aren't just building skill in the traditional sense. They're literally changing brain structure. Each practice session promotes additional myelination, making relevant neural pathways faster and more efficient. Over time, these changes create brains that are structurally different from people who haven't engaged in intensive practice. However, myelination alone doesn't create prodigies. Some children practice intensively without achieving prodigy-level performance. This suggests that prodigies start with some baseline advantage, perhaps more efficient neural processing, perhaps brains that are particularly responsive to practice, perhaps differences in brain areas that process information relevant to their domain. The intensive practice then amplifies these baseline advantages, creating the dramatic abilities we recognize as prodigious. The concept of critical periods in brain development is particularly relevant for understanding prodigies. For certain abilities, there appear to be windows in childhood when the brain is particularly plastic and responsive to training. Language learning is the most famous example. Children acquire languages much more easily than adults, particularly accent-free pronunciation. Similar critical periods may exist for music, with early training producing different neural organization than later training. This raises questions about the ethics of intensive early training. If the window for optimal development is in early childhood, should parents push young children into intensive practice to maximize their potential? Or should childhood be protected as a time for play, exploration, and general development, even if this means missing optimal windows for specific skill development? Savant syndrome provides fascinating insights into how exceptional ability can emerge from different brain organization. Some individuals with autism or other developmental conditions display remarkable abilities in specific areas: music, art, calculation, memory, despite having significant challenges in other domains. These savant abilities appear to result from unusual brain organization, where resources normally distributed across multiple functions become concentrated in specific areas. The existence of savant syndrome demonstrates that exceptional ability doesn't require overall high intelligence. A person can have profound intellectual disabilities in most areas while displaying genius-level ability in one specific domain. This suggests that prodigious ability results from specific brain characteristics related to processing information in particular ways, not from general cognitive superiority. Studies of London taxi drivers have shown that intensive spatial navigation training actually changes brain structure, increasing the size of the hippocampus, a brain region crucial for spatial memory. This demonstrates that even adult brains remain plastic enough to show structural changes in response to intensive practice. Child brains, being more plastic, presumably show even more dramatic changes in response to intensive training in any domain. The question of whether these brain changes represent development or specialization is important. When a musical prodigy's brain becomes highly optimized for processing music, is this purely beneficial? Or could it come at some cost? Perhaps less flexibility for processing other types of information or less capacity for general problem solving. The brain has finite resources, and optimizing for one type of processing might reduce capacity for others. Research on neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself, has revealed that this flexibility is a double-edged sword. The same plasticity that allows young brains to become highly specialized also means they can become rigidly organized in ways that are difficult to change later. A child who spends thousands of hours practicing music develops a brain that's exceptional at music processing, but may have missed developmental windows for other abilities. The role of dopamine and reward systems in maintaining the intense practice schedules that prodigies follow deserves attention. Practice must feel rewarding, or children simply won't maintain it at the levels required for prodigious development. Prodigies often describe loving their practice, finding it inherently satisfying rather than being externally motivated by praise or rewards. This suggests their brains might process the activity as particularly rewarding, releasing dopamine in response to successful performance or problem solving. This neurochemical component of prodigious ability raises interesting questions. Are prodigies born with reward systems that respond particularly strongly to their area of talent? Or does early success and positive feedback train their reward systems to respond strongly? Probably both. Initial advantage leads to early success, which triggers reward system activation, which motivates more practice, which produces more success, creating a positive feedback loop. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive functions like planning, impulse control, and working memory, develops gradually throughout childhood and adolescence. Prodigies must somehow manage the unusual situation of having exceptional abilities in their domain while still having developing executive function systems. This mismatch can create challenges. They can execute complex performances or solve difficult problems while still struggling with impulse control, emotional regulation, or long-term planning. Understanding the neuroscience of prodigious ability doesn't diminish the wonder of these remarkable children. If anything, it deepens our appreciation by revealing the complex interplay of genes, brain structure, intensive practice, and environmental support that must align to produce exceptional early ability. These children aren't just born different. They develop differently, their brains literally reshaping themselves in response to their experiences and efforts. There's a peculiar loneliness to being the smartest person in every room, especially when you're too young to drive, vote, or even understand why the adults around you seem to relate to you differently than they relate to other children. Former child prodigies often describe feeling like they were living in two worlds simultaneously. intellectually connected to adult concepts and concerns, while emotionally still being children who needed comfort, play, and the simple joy of being understood. The developmental mismatch between intellectual and emotional growth creates unique psychological challenges. A 12-year-old working on university-level physics understands quantum mechanics, but might still cry when excluded from a birthday party. They can engage with abstract philosophical concepts, but struggle with the concrete social realities of middle school. This asynchronous development, where different aspects of the person mature at wildly different rates, can create internal tension and confusion. Psychologist Letta Hollingworth, who studied gifted children extensively in the early 20th century, identified what she called the communication problem. Children whose intelligence puts them more than 2 standard deviations above their age peers struggle to communicate effectively with those peers. Their vocabulary, interests, humor, and ways of thinking differ too much for easy connection. They're too advanced for their age mates, but too young for the adults who share their intellectual level. This communication problem can lead to profound isolation. Other children might see the prodigy as weird, intimidating, or simply impossible to relate to. Adults might appreciate the prodigy's abilities, but can't treat them as true equals because of the age gap. The prodigy ends up belonging fully to neither group, existing in a liminal space between childhood and intellectual adulthood. Many former prodigies describe developing what they call a performance self to navigate social situations. They learn to hide their intelligence, to pretend not to know things, to deliberately make mistakes to seem more normal. This masks the extent of their abilities, but creates psychological stress from constantly performing normalcy rather than being authentic. The performance self protects them from social rejection, but prevents genuine connection. The concept of gifted child burden encompasses several psychological challenges. Perfectionism develops when children learn that their value comes from exceptional performance. Every task becomes weighted with the need to excel, and anything less than perfect feels like failure. This perfectionism can be paralyzing, preventing prodigies from taking risks or trying new things where they might not immediately excel. Imposter syndrome frequently affects prodigies as they grow up. Despite objective evidence of their abilities, they feel like frauds who have somehow fooled everyone. They attribute their success to luck, circumstance, or others' assistance rather than to genuine ability. This makes sense when you consider that prodigies often achieve things without fully understanding how. Their abilities feel natural rather than earned, so success doesn't feel like true accomplishment. Anxiety and depression appear more frequently in gifted populations than in the general population, contradicting the assumption that high ability should make life easier. The pressure of expectations, the isolation from peers, the awareness of complex problems that others ignore, the sensitivity that often accompanies giftedness, all contribute to mental health challenges. Prodigies understand too much too young, seeing complexity and difficulty that their age peers remain blissfully unaware of. The relationship between high intelligence and happiness is complex and often disappointing for prodigies and their families. Research consistently shows that beyond a certain threshold, perhaps an IQ around 120 to 130, additional intelligence doesn't correlate with additional happiness or life satisfaction. In fact, extremely high intelligence can reduce happiness by increasing awareness of problems, reducing ability to find intellectual peers, and creating expectations that are difficult to fulfill. Existential depression can strike gifted children surprisingly young. When a 7-year-old understands concepts like mortality, injustice, and the vastness of the universe, they may experience existential crises that typically affect much older individuals. They ask questions like, "What's the point of anything?" or "Why does death exist?" with genuine philosophical depth, seeking answers that adults struggle to provide. The intensity of experience that many prodigies report, feeling emotions more deeply, caring more passionately about ideas, being unable to let go of problems or questions, can be both a gift and a burden. This intensity contributes to their exceptional focus and achievement, but it also makes ordinary life more challenging. Small slights feel enormous. Minor disappointments become crises. The volume of experience is turned up in ways that can be overwhelming. Many prodigies develop what psychologists call multipotentiality, the ability to excel in multiple different domains. This sounds wonderful, but creates its own stress. When you could be exceptional at music, mathematics, writing, and chess, how do you choose which path to pursue? The pressure to pick the right path, combined with fear of wasting potential in the paths not chosen, can create decision paralysis. The phenomenon of underachievement in gifted children seems paradoxical, but makes psychological sense. Some prodigies deliberately underperform as a form of rebellion against expectations, as a way to reclaim control over their lives, or as a response to burnout. Others underachieve because school is insufficiently challenging, and they never develop study skills or work ethic. When everything comes easily, they don't learn how to struggle productively. The transition through adolescence creates additional challenges for prodigies. Teenagers typically form identity through peer relationships and rebellion against authority. But prodigies often lack same-age peers they can truly relate to, and their identity is already strongly tied to their exceptional abilities. Normal teenage experimentation with different identities feels dangerous because it might threaten their status as exceptional. Relationships and sexuality present particular challenges. Prodigies often feel more comfortable with people who share their intellectual level, but this might mean being attracted to much older individuals. Age-appropriate romantic interests might feel intellectually incompatible. This creates situations where prodigies either feel isolated in relationships or pursue connections that are developmentally inappropriate. The role of parents in shaping the psychological development of prodigies cannot be overstated. Parents who see their child's ability as primarily a source of pride or achievement create different psychological environments than parents who see it as one aspect of a whole child who needs support. The most psychologically healthy former prodigies often describe parents who celebrated their abilities while ensuring they had space to be normal children. Some parents struggle with their own identities becoming wrapped up in their prodigy child's accomplishments. When parents introduce themselves by leading with their child's achievements, when social gatherings become opportunities to showcase the child, when family decisions revolve entirely around supporting the child's talent development, the child learns that their value lies primarily in performance, rather than in simply being loved. Sibling dynamics in families with a prodigy child can be complicated. Non-prodigy siblings may feel overshadowed, receiving less attention or feeling that their accomplishments are less valued. Some develop resentment toward their exceptional sibling. Others become protective and supportive. The impact on siblings deserves consideration, but often gets overlooked in focus on the prodigy. Therapy and counseling can be extremely helpful for prodigies struggling with the psychological challenges of giftedness. But finding therapists who understand the unique issues facing exceptional children can be difficult. Many therapists assume that high intelligence should make life easier and struggle to understand why someone so capable would experience psychological distress. The question of whether it's better to have been a prodigy or to have had a more typical childhood doesn't have a single answer. Some former prodigies express gratitude for their abilities and the opportunities they provided. Others wish they could have had more normal developmental experiences. Most feel ambivalent, appreciating aspects of their experience while acknowledging the costs. What emerges clearly from studying the psychology of prodigies is that exceptional ability doesn't exempt anyone from the normal challenges of human development. If anything, it adds additional layers of complexity. The most successful outcomes occur when prodigies receive support, not just for their exceptional abilities, but for their whole development as complex human beings trying to navigate growing up, while being fundamentally different from most of their peers. The question has haunted parents, educators, and scientists for centuries. Are prodigies born or made? Can intensive training create genius, or does it merely develop innate potential that was always present? The truth, as with most nature versus nurture debates, is complicated, involving interactions between genes, environment, practice, and factors we're only beginning to understand. The genetic component of exceptional ability seems undeniable. Prodigious ability runs in families at rates far higher than chance would predict. Mozart's father Leopold was a capable musician and composer. Einstein's family included several successful merchants with strong mathematical abilities. The Polgar sisters, 3 chess prodigies deliberately trained by their father to prove that genius could be taught. All became exceptional players, but they started with a father who was already a strong chess player and education theorist. Twin studies provide some of the strongest evidence for genetic influences on ability. Identical twins, even when raised in different environments, show more similar levels of ability in various domains than fraternal twins or non-twin siblings. This suggests that genes contribute significantly to potential for exceptional performance. But twin studies also show that environment matters. Identical twins raised in different circumstances develop differently despite identical genetic starting points. The field of behavioral genetics has identified specific genes associated with various cognitive abilities. Genes involved in brain development, neural connectivity, neurotransmitter function, and neural plasticity all contribute to intellectual potential. But it's crucial to understand that thousands of genes interact to influence any complex trait. There's no single genius gene that creates prodigious ability. Rather, genius emerges from favorable combinations of many genetic factors. However, genes alone aren't sufficient. Even the most favorable genetic endowment requires environmental support to develop into prodigious performance. A child born with perfect pitch and exceptional auditory processing won't become a musical prodigy without access to musical training and instruments. A child with exceptional spatial reasoning and strategic thinking abilities won't become a chess prodigy without exposure to chess. This brings us to the controversial 10,000-hour rule, popularized by Malcolm Gladwell based on research by Anders Ericsson. The idea suggests that achieving expert-level performance in any domain requires approximately 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. This framework emphasizes effort and training over innate talent, suggesting that anyone willing to put in the hours can achieve excellence. The reality is more nuanced. Ericsson's research did find that elite performers in various domains had accumulated roughly 10,000 hours of practice. But this doesn't mean that 10,000 hours of practice guarantees elite performance. Many people practice extensively without achieving exceptional results. The 10,000 hours appears necessary, but not sufficient for expert-level achievement. Moreover, not all practice is equal. Ericsson emphasized deliberate practice, focused, effortful training with immediate feedback designed to improve specific aspects of performance. Simply spending time on an activity doesn't count. A child who plays chess casually for thousands of hours will develop very differently than one who spends those hours studying master games, analyzing positions, working with coaches, and deliberately practicing weak areas. The concept of talent becomes clearer when we understand it as trainability. How much improvement a person gains from each hour of practice. 2 children might both practice piano for 1 hour. One improves rapidly, efficiently converting practice time into skill development. The other improves more slowly, requiring more practice hours to achieve the same results. The first child appears more talented, but what we're really observing is more efficient learning. This efficiency of learning likely has genetic components. Brains that process relevant information more efficiently, that form strong memories from fewer repetitions, that generalize from specific examples more readily. These neurological advantages would manifest as talent even though they're fundamentally about learning efficiency rather than innate ability. The phenomenon of rage to master appears in many prodigies, an almost obsessive drive to engage with their domain of talent. Young chess prodigies want to play chess constantly. Musical prodigies seek out opportunities to practice and perform. Mathematical prodigies fill notebooks with calculations and proofs. This intense, self-motivated engagement creates the thousands of hours of practice that develop prodigious skill. Where does this rage to master come from? Probably from interaction between temperament, ability, and early success. A child with natural aptitude tries an activity and experiences success. Success feels rewarding, triggering dopamine release and positive emotions. This motivates more engagement, leading to more success, creating a positive feedback loop. The child's temperament, whether they're persistent, focused, comfortable with solitary activities, influences whether this loop continues or peters out. The role of early intervention and support cannot be overstated. Prodigious ability rarely develops without adult recognition and facilitation. Someone must notice the child's unusual abilities, provide resources for development, arrange for advanced training, and create opportunities for the child to engage with their domain at appropriate levels. Even the most talented child is unlikely to develop prodigiously without this environmental support. This raises questions about children with prodigious potential who never develop that potential due to lack of opportunity. How many potential musical prodigies never access musical instruments or training? How many potential mathematical geniuses grow up in educational environments that never challenge or recognize their abilities? The geographic and economic distribution of recognized prodigies suggests that we're seeing only a fraction of the children who could develop prodigiously under different circumstances. The concept of tiger parenting, extremely intensive, demanding parenting focused on achievement, has become associated with prodigy development, particularly in Asian and Asian American communities. The Polgar sisters represent an extreme example. Their father Laszlo deliberately set out to prove that genius could be created through intensive early training, and he succeeded in producing 3 daughters who all became exceptional chess players. But tiger parenting is controversial, with critics arguing that it sacrifices children's well-being, autonomy, and breadth of development for achievement in narrow domains. Some former prodigies describe tiger parenting as essential to their development. Others describe it as traumatic, creating psychological damage that they spent adulthood recovering from. The effectiveness and ethics of this approach remain debated. Research suggests that parental support and involvement matter enormously, but that the specific style of that involvement varies. Some prodigies thrive under demanding, structured training regimens. Others develop best with more autonomy and self-directed exploration. The key appears to be matching parental approach to child temperament and needs rather than applying any single formula. The question of specialization versus broad development creates tension in raising prodigies. Does intensive focus on a single domain from early age maximize development of that talent, or does it create unhealthy imbalance and prevent development of other abilities? The answer probably depends on the child, the domain, and the specific implementation. Some domains appear to require early intensive training for expert-level achievement. Musical performance, gymnastics, and figure skating all seem to have critical periods where plasticity allows development of abilities that are difficult or impossible to acquire later. For these domains, early specialization might be necessary for reaching the highest levels. Other domains allow for later development. Mathematics and chess can be taken up later in childhood with still excellent results, though very early starters may have some advantages. Writing and other creative arts often benefit from life experience that requires time to accumulate, suggesting that early specialization might actually be counterproductive. Perhaps most importantly, the nature versus nurture debate about prodigies shouldn't become a way of determining who deserves recognition for exceptional achievement. Whether ability comes primarily from genes or from training, the child who develops that ability still experiences it as their own. They still put in the work, experienced the challenges, and produced the exceptional performance. The source of the ability matters less than how we support the child in developing it healthily. William James Sidis could read by age 2. By 4, he had taught himself Latin. At age 8, he passed the entrance exam for MIT, but was told he was too young to attend. He entered Harvard at age 11 and gave a lecture on four-dimensional bodies to the Harvard Mathematical Club that left professors amazed. Newspapers hailed him as the smartest person alive. By all accounts, he was destined for revolutionary achievement. Instead, Sidis spent his adult life working clerical jobs, living in boarding houses, and deliberately hiding his abilities. He wrote pseudonymously about obscure topics. He collected streetcar transfers as a hobby. When reporters tracked him down, seeking to document what had happened to the famous boy genius, they found a man who seemed to have deliberately chosen obscurity over achievement. Sidis died at age 46, likely of a stroke, having contributed little to the fields that had once expected greatness from him. What happened to William James Sidis? The answer is complex, involving overwhelming pressure, social isolation, resentment of publicity, possible undiagnosed mental health issues, and perhaps simply a choice to live differently than others expected. His story haunts every discussion of child prodigies because it represents the nightmare scenario. Exceptional early ability that doesn't translate into adult achievement or happiness. Sidis isn't alone. The history of child prodigies includes many who faded from public view or actively rejected the paths their early abilities seemed to prescribe. Some burned out from the pressure and intensity of prodigious childhood. Others discovered that being exceptional as a child didn't necessarily mean achieving adult success in competitive fields where everyone is exceptional. Still others simply chose different paths, deciding that the life of a prodigy wasn't one they wanted to continue living. Burnout in prodigies manifests in various ways. Some maintain technical ability but lose all emotional connection to their domain. A musician might continue playing at a high level while feeling nothing from the music that once moved them to tears. A chess player might mechanically execute moves while experiencing no joy in the game. The activity becomes purely mechanical, stripped of meaning and pleasure. Others experience more dramatic burnout where ability itself seems to deteriorate. A mathematical prodigy who once solved problems effortlessly suddenly finds that mathematics feels difficult and frustrating. This can be psychologically devastating. The ability felt like a core part of identity, and its loss creates identity crisis. Who are you if you're no longer the math prodigy, the chess champion, the musical genius? The pressure of expectations contributes significantly to burnout. When everyone expects greatness, when your worth has been tied to exceptional performance, when failure means not just losing, but disappointing countless people, the psychological weight becomes enormous. Some prodigies describe feeling that they were living not their own lives, but lives choreographed by others' expectations and investments. The transition from child prodigy to adult performer creates unique challenges. As children, prodigies were remarkable simply for performing at high levels at young ages. Media coverage, public attention, and opportunities came partly from the novelty of the child who can do X. But as adults, they're competing with everyone else at those high levels, and their youth no longer makes them special. The same performance that seemed miraculous at 12 feels merely competent at 25. This loss of special status can be psychologically difficult. Some prodigies struggle with becoming ordinary members of their fields, recognized for competence but not worshipped for genius. Others find that fields that seem to promise endless fascination during childhood feel routine and tedious in adulthood. The reality of professional work, with its politics, compromises, and mundane aspects, doesn't match the pure intellectual or artistic engagement that characterized their prodigious childhoods. Mental health issues appear at elevated rates among former prodigies, though it's difficult to determine whether this results from the experience of being a prodigy or from factors that created the prodigious ability in the first place. Depression, anxiety, social difficulties, and perfectionism all appear more frequently than in general populations. Some of this likely results from the isolation, pressure, and asynchronous development that prodigies experience. The phenomenon of second-act prodigies offers some hope. Former child prodigies who struggle in young adulthood but find their footing later in life. Some take breaks from their domains, spending years doing other things before returning with renewed perspective and motivation. Others shift to related areas that feel fresher and less weighted with childhood associations. Still others find fulfillment in teaching, sharing their domains with new generations without the pressure of personal performance. The stories of prodigies who failed to meet expectations often reveal problems with the expectations rather than with the individuals. A musical prodigy who becomes a music teacher rather than a concert soloist hasn't failed. They've found a different expression for their abilities. A mathematical prodigy who becomes an engineer rather than a research mathematician is still using their gifts productively. The failure lies in narrow definitions of success that value only the most prestigious outcomes. Some former prodigies report profound relief at stepping away from their areas of prodigious performance. They describe feeling like they can finally breathe, like they've escaped a prison they didn't realize they were in. These accounts suggest that for some prodigies, the ability itself wasn't the problem. The pressure, publicity, and expectations surrounding it were. Without those external forces, they couldn't continue engaging with the domain. The role of identity in burnout deserves attention. When your entire sense of self is built around being a prodigy, any threat to that identity feels existential. A bad performance isn't just disappointing. It questions your fundamental understanding of who you are. This makes psychological resilience difficult because there's no stable self independent of the prodigious ability to fall back on when challenges arise. Social media and modern technology have created new forms of pressure for contemporary prodigies. Every performance can be recorded, shared, and compared to others. Negative comments from anonymous strangers can be psychologically damaging. The constant awareness of how you measure up against other exceptional performers creates anxiety that previous generations of prodigies didn't experience as intensely. The question of whether prodigious childhood is worth the risk of burnout doesn't have a universal answer. For some former prodigies, the experiences, opportunities, and development that came from their exceptional childhoods justify the challenges. For others, the cost was too high, and they wish they could have had more typical developmental experiences. Most seem to hold complex, mixed feelings, appreciating aspects of their experience while acknowledging significant costs. What's clear from studying burnout in prodigies is that ability alone isn't sufficient for sustained success and satisfaction. Psychological resilience, social support, autonomy in choosing how to use one's abilities, and opportunities to develop identity beyond prodigious performance. These factors often matter more than raw ability in determining whether early promise translates into fulfilling adult life. The most poignant aspect of stories like William James Siddy's is that they remind us that human beings aren't instruments for producing achievement. Even exceptional ability doesn't obligate anyone to use that ability in ways that others prescribe. A prodigy who chooses an ordinary, quiet life over fame and achievement has made a valid choice, not a failure. Perhaps the true failure lies in systems and cultures that can't accept that choice, that see it as waste rather than as one person's path to peace. A 13-year-old uploads a video to YouTube demonstrating a novel approach to a complex programming problem. Within hours, it has thousands of views. Software engineers from major tech companies watch it and post comments. One offers a job contingent on finishing high school. Another asks if the teen is available for consulting. Within a day, this child has more professional opportunities than many computer science graduates. This scenario, impossible 20 years ago, plays out regularly in our hyperconnected digital age. The internet has fundamentally transformed what it means to be a prodigy. Previous generations of exceptional children were limited by geography, access to resources, and the gatekeeper systems that controlled entry to advanced training and professional opportunities. A mathematical prodigy in a rural area might never encounter problems appropriate to their level, or connect with mentors who could guide their development. Now that same prodigy can access online courses from top universities, participate in international mathematical forums, collaborate with researchers thousands of miles away, and build reputation through online contributions, all before graduating high school. The barriers between exceptional children and the resources they need to develop have lowered dramatically, democratizing prodigy development in unprecedented ways. Social media creates new forms of visibility for young talent. Musicians post performances on YouTube and Instagram, building audiences of millions. Artists share work on platforms like DeviantArt and gain followings that traditional gallery systems would take decades to build. Young writers publish fan fiction online, receiving immediate feedback from thousands of readers. This visibility brings opportunities, but also pressures that previous prodigies didn't face. The case of Akrit Jaswal illustrates both the opportunities and challenges of digital age prodigies. At age 7, Jaswal performed his first surgery, helping a neighbor whose fingers were fused together. News coverage spread internationally, and he became known as the world's youngest surgeon. By his teens, he was appearing on television programs, giving speeches about medical research, and being celebrated as a prodigy who would revolutionize medicine. But the reality proved more complex. Jaswal's early surgical intervention, while dramatic, didn't represent the kind of systematic medical training required for actual medical practice. The media attention created expectations that his actual development couldn't meet. He became famous for being famous, a phenomenon that social media amplifies. His story reveals how modern prodigies can become celebrities, whose public images diverge from their actual abilities and development. Coding represents a new frontier for prodigious development. Programming requires logic, pattern recognition, problem-solving, and systematic thinking, cognitive abilities that some children possess at exceptional levels. Unlike music or chess, which require years of training to reach high levels, programming allows rapid achievement visible in working software. A talented 12-year-old can create apps or programs that have genuine utility and value. This creates opportunities for young programmers to contribute meaningfully to technology in ways that would be impossible in more established fields. A 15-year-old might identify and fix security vulnerabilities in major software, create popular apps used by millions, or develop new algorithms that advance the field. Their youth becomes less relevant than the quality of their work. However, the tech industry's enthusiasm for young programmers sometimes crosses into problematic territory. Stories of teenagers dropping out of school to join startups or launch their own companies are celebrated without adequate consideration of what these children sacrifice. The pressure to commercialize abilities rather than develop them for their own sake, can be intense. Competitive programming provides structure for developing young coders while avoiding some of the commercialization pressures. Competitions like the International Olympiad in Informatics allow young programmers to test themselves against challenging problems and peers worldwide. Success brings recognition without necessarily requiring the child to enter professional work before they're ready. The phenomenon of young YouTubers and social media influencers represents a new category of prodigy. The one where exceptional ability might be less relevant than personality, timing, and understanding of platforms. A 10-year-old who builds a following of millions by filming themselves playing video games or unboxing toys achieves a kind of success. But it differs fundamentally from prodigious ability in traditional domains. This raises questions about what we value in exceptional children. Is a young influencer who makes millions of dollars equivalent to a young mathematician proving theorems? Both are unusual achievements for their age, but they require different abilities and have different implications for development. The conflation of various types of unusual achievement under prodigy might obscure important distinctions. Online education platforms have created opportunities for self-directed learning that benefit prodigies enormously. A child who exhausts their school's mathematics curriculum can take university-level courses online. Someone interested in quantum physics can access lectures from leading researchers. The knowledge that was once locked behind institutional gates is now freely available to anyone with internet access and the motivation to learn. However, self-directed online learning requires maturity and executive function that many children lack, even intellectually advanced ones. A prodigy might have the intellectual ability to understand advanced material, but lack the discipline and planning skills to progress through online courses effectively. This is where parental guidance and support remain crucial even in the digital age. The global nature of modern prodigy culture creates new forms of competition and comparison. A musical prodigy is no longer competing just with other talented children in their city. They're implicitly competing with exceptional young musicians worldwide, all of whose performances are accessible on YouTube. This can be motivating, but also overwhelming, creating anxiety about how one measures up against the absolute best globally. COVID-19 and the shift to remote learning revealed both opportunities and challenges for prodigies in digital environments. Some thrived with the flexibility and self-pacing that online learning offered. Others struggled with isolation, lack of structure, or the difficulty of maintaining motivation without in-person interaction. The pandemic served as a large-scale experiment in digital learning that has implications for how we support exceptional children going forward. Modern neuroplasticity research, made widely accessible through popular science communication, has changed how parents approach developing children's abilities. Understanding that intensive early practice creates lasting changes in brain structure has motivated some parents to push for earlier and more intensive training. This knowledge can be used wisely or become justification for excessive pressure, depending on how parents interpret and apply it. The question of screen time and digital engagement for young prodigies is complex. Time spent coding, creating digital art, or engaging with online educational resources is productive in ways that passive screen time isn't. Yet the distinction between productive and passive screen use can blur, and concerns about digital addiction, reduced physical activity, and impact on developing social skills remain relevant even for prodigies. Contemporary prodigies also face the challenge of maintaining privacy in an age where everything can be recorded and shared. Mistakes, failures, or simply awkward moments of development that previous generations of prodigies experienced privately might now be preserved online permanently. This creates pressure to be on constantly, to maintain the prodigy image rather than experiencing the messy reality of growing up. The most successful contemporary prodigies seem to be those who use digital tools and connectivity to support their development, without letting their identities become entirely defined by online presence. They engage with global communities of people sharing their interests, access resources that develop their abilities, and share their work, but maintain enough separation to develop as whole people rather than as pure performers for digital audiences. The story we tell about child prodigies typically follows a predictable arc. Exceptional early ability, intensive development, breakthrough achievement, continued excellence into adulthood, revolutionary contribution to their field. This narrative satisfies our desire for meaning and order. The prodigies' gifts weren't wasted, their childhood sacrifices were justified, everything worked out as it should. But this narrative fails most prodigies because it defines success so narrowly. It suggests that prodigious childhood only pays off if it leads to exceptional adult achievement in the same domain. By this logic, a musical prodigy who becomes a music teacher rather than a concert soloist has somehow failed. A mathematical prodigy who finds fulfillment in engineering rather than pure mathematics hasn't lived up to their potential. These judgments reflect our projections more than any genuine assessment of the individual's life. We see exceptional childhood ability and imagine what we would do with such gifts, the heights we would reach, the contributions we would make. When the prodigy chooses differently, we feel disappointed, as if they owed us the fulfillment of our fantasies about what exceptional ability should produce. The reality is that many former prodigies lead deeply satisfying lives that don't include revolutionary achievement in their areas of childhood excellence. They use their abilities in ways that provide personal fulfillment, support themselves and their families, and contribute meaningfully to the world, just not in the spectacular ways that the prodigy narrative promises. Some maintain involvement with their domains while deliberately choosing not to pursue the highest levels of achievement. A former piano prodigy might play for personal enjoyment, teach, or perform in community settings without seeking a career as a concert pianist. This represents not failure, but a healthy relationship with an ability that once defined their identity. They've integrated the talent into a balanced life rather than letting it consume everything. Others step away entirely, finding that the associations with their prodigious childhoods make the domain itself feel tainted or burdensome. A chess prodigy might not touch a chess board for years after retiring from competition. This can look like waste, all that ability lying dormant, but it might represent necessary distance from something that became too weighted with pressure and expectation. The concept of normal takes on special meaning for former prodigies. Many describe longing for normalcy during their prodigious childhoods. The simple ability to relate to peers, to have typical adolescent experiences, to feel like they fit in somewhere. Achieving normalcy as adults, even if it means being less exceptional, can feel like profound accomplishment and relief. This doesn't mean former prodigies become ordinary in all respects. The abilities that made them prodigious often remain, even if not actively cultivated. The patterns of thinking, the facility with certain types of problems, the heightened perception in their domains, these don't disappear. They simply become parts of a larger identity rather than the defining characteristic. Many former prodigies find fulfillment in teaching or mentoring, using their understanding of exceptional development to guide others. They can recognize talent in children, provide appropriate challenge and support, and offer perspective about the experience of being different that parents and typical teachers might lack. This represents meaningful use of their experiences, even if it's not the kind of achievement that makes headlines. The question of whether prodigious childhood was worth it often receives nuanced answers from those who lived it. They acknowledge both gifts and costs, the opportunities, experiences, and development of abilities they value. The pressure, isolation, and loss of typical childhood experiences they regret. Most seem to wish not that they hadn't been prodigies, but that the experience had been handled differently. Less pressure, more balance, greater respect for their wholeness, as people rather than just as performers of exceptional abilities. Psychological research on adult happiness suggests that factors like strong relationships, sense of purpose, autonomy, and mastery predict well-being more than achievement or ability. By these measures, a former prodigy who has good friends, does work they find meaningful, has control over their choices, and maintains areas of competence might be more successfully happy than one who achieved great eminence while remaining isolated and feeling pressured. The role of comparison in prodigy experience can't be overstated. Prodigies spend their childhoods being compared to typical children, which makes them feel exceptional. Then they're compared to adult professionals, which makes them feel inadequate. Later, they're compared to expectations about what prodigies should achieve, which creates pressure. Learning to stop comparing themselves to others and to evaluate their own lives by their own standards often represents crucial psychological development. Some former prodigies actively advocate for changing how society treats exceptional children. They argue for less publicity, more protection of childhood, greater emphasis on well-being versus achievement, and recognition that exceptional ability doesn't obligate exceptional achievement. Their voices provide valuable perspective in debates about how to support gifted children. The beauty of stepping away from prodigy identity into simply being a person with various abilities and interests is that it allows for discovery of what genuinely brings joy versus what brought praise or met expectations. A mathematical prodigy might discover they actually love cooking more than mathematics, or that the satisfaction of teaching others exceeds the satisfaction of personal achievement, or that they want to use mathematical thinking in unexpected ways rather than pursuing traditional mathematical careers. Perhaps the most profound form of success for former prodigies is developing the ability to accept themselves as whole, complex people, rather than as instruments for producing exceptional performance. This means integrating their exceptional abilities as parts of themselves rather than as their entire identity. It means acknowledging both pride in their achievements and grief for what their unusual childhoods cost them. It also means extending to themselves the compassion and understanding that they likely extend to others. Many former prodigies are remarkably understanding of other people's struggles and choices, but hold themselves to impossible standards. Learning to treat themselves with the same kindness they offer others represents significant psychological achievement. The question, what should society do with child prodigies, doesn't have a single answer, but some principles emerge from studying those who navigated prodigious childhoods most successfully. Support the whole child, not just the exceptional ability. Provide appropriate challenge without excessive pressure. Protect privacy and normalcy where possible. Ensure opportunities for peer connection and typical developmental experiences. Remember that childhood is valuable in itself, not just as preparation for adulthood. Most importantly, perhaps, is recognizing that prodigies are still children. They need play, rest, love, and acceptance that isn't contingent on performance. They need adults who care about their well-being more than their achievement. They need space to discover who they are beyond their abilities and permission to choose paths that might not maximize their potential, but that feel right to them. The ultimate measure of success for a former prodigy might not be whether they revolutionized their field or achieved lasting fame. It might simply be whether they're living lives they find meaningful and satisfying, whether they've developed into people capable of connection and happiness, whether they've found peace with their pasts and hope for their futures. By these measures, many so-called failed prodigies are actually quite successful. Tonight, we've explored the fascinating and often bittersweet world of child prodigies. What emerges most clearly is that the children behind the exceptional abilities are still children. They need love, understanding, space to grow, and permission to become whoever they're meant to be, regardless of what their early abilities suggest they should become. Perhaps the greatest gift we can offer prodigies is the freedom to eventually become former prodigies. People who carry remarkable abilities as parts of themselves, but not as their entire identity. Who can appreciate their exceptional childhoods while also embracing the peace of being ordinary, complex, beautifully flawed human beings. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the world of child prodigies. If you're already drifting off, then our mission is complete. But if you're still awake, perhaps another deep dive through one of our previous episodes will carry you gently into slumber. Until we meet again in these quiet hours, may you appreciate your own unique abilities without comparing them to others. May you extend compassion to your younger self who did the best they could. And may you find peace in knowing that being ordinary is, in its own way, an extraordinary gift.